youth and young adults cessation. Our first webinar really focused more on the research and the data in terms of how we know youth and young adults quit tobacco. And this is really going to be more of a case study. So we're going to be looking specifically at CYAN social media efforts from April 2020 to January of 2021. We launched 2 full digital treatment campaigns specifically for youth and young adult audiences. And so this is going to be an overview of really how we put that together, how we crafted our messages, our outcomes, and most importantly, our lessons learned. So we're calling this our CYAN case study. And again, hopefully at the end, we will have some time for questions. So I would love for you as you're going through this, if you have something that comes up, to pop it in the chat, or again, at the end, to hopefully have a good facilitated discussion. And again, for those of you that didn't join us on the first webinar, but are hopping on for the second, my name is Caitlin Maisman, and I am the outreach coordinator here at CYAN. Everyone's favorite slide. Quickly here, California Youth Advocacy Network is a statewide technical assistance provider funded by the California Tobacco Control Program. We have 3 primary areas of focus. We work with youth, college students, and military installations. And we really focus our youth work on engaging young people to impact local change. With colleges and universities, we work to help create and implement smoke and tobacco-free policies, and of course, support students in quitting. And then with our military installations, to really denormalize that use of tobacco. And then just quickly here before we dive in, I wanted to introduce our team. In case you aren't familiar with all of our faces, I do see some of my coworkers and my team members on this webinar today. We have Vicki, our managing director, Kimberly, our project director. That's me up there in the right-hand corner, the outreach coordinator. And then our youth program is Nicole, Ignacio, and Dean Paul. And then Alex, who is our college team coordinator. So just a quick overview of today's training session. I'm going to briefly start by talking about how we craft our messaging and what that looks like. With every campaign, we do a full communications plan. That in itself is a 2-hour training. So this is going to be a really big picture, but that's a really popular and pressing question when I talk with coalitions and with young people about where to start. So we're going to kind of start at that higher level of how we start that messaging. We're going to talk about how we consumer tested with youth and young adults once those messages were created, and how we place them. So specifically why we chose certain platforms. Then we're going to look at really our findings and our lessons learned. And this is going to be kind of the big case study portion. There were some things that we did really well. There were some things that we had to tweak for the second part of the campaign, and we're going to be sharing that with you. Again, this is not the gold standard. This is our experience. But I think sort of they are really applicable broadly. And then finally, we're going to share some of the CYAN social media and digital resources we have available to you. And then hopefully, again, time permitting, we'll have some time for discussion at the end. So I'd like to go ahead and actually start with a poll. I think it's important before we kind of jump in to really understand how much time young people are using and spending on social media. So Dean Paul, if you go ahead and pop up that poll. So I'd like folks to reply with how many hours per day you think young people, so this is 18 to 24, are spending every day on social media. And this is just social media, so not on a screen, but specifically on a screen with social media. All right. 0% have guessed 0 to 1 hours to give you an idea. So I think you can kind of have an idea of where this is going. Okay, lots of folks at that 3 to 4 hour, 4+. Couple folks are still answering there. Give it one more second. So most of you guess that 4 plus, guess that 4 plus amount. And whoops. You would be correct. And again, we know that this is mostly social media being accessed on their phone. About 2/3 of young people aged 13 and up report having a smartphone and exclusively using that smartphone to access the internet and social media. And keep in mind, so this 4.5 hours is just social media. This doesn't include things like homework or email or other types of interaction on the internet. And one study actually estimates that young people are spending almost 9 hours per day on a screen, excluding school time. So young people are spending lots and lots and lots of time on social media. So again, as we talked about, the average young person is on about 4.5-ish hours. Most actively, they're on between 4 to 10 p.m. So that kind of period after school, maybe after classes. And they do report using social media most often while watching TV. So it's interesting to hear there's almost like a multitasking of screens. So as we're thinking about putting together campaigns for youth and young adults, we have to be mindful that we're competing with a lot of distractions, with a lot of scrolling. So again, really starting to craft and place those correct messages is going to be critical, because we know that there are so many other competitors, other screens, other posts that we really need to craft a smart and poignant message to get these young people to interact with it. Okay, last poll here. You're all doing very well. Of the social media platforms, what platform do you think young people are spending the most time on per day? So again, this is 13 to 24. So which platform are they spending the most time on? Okay, wow, there's one very popular answer here. Couple of folks still needing to answer. We're at about 80%. We'll give it another second here. Okay. So most of you thought TikTok, and that was my estimation as well. Just shy of 70% of you guessed that it was TikTok. It is actually Instagram, which was a surprise to me as well. Young people report spending the most time per day on Instagram. And the top 5 platforms that they report using, so not far behind, and this is in order, is TikTok, YouTube, Snapchat, and Twitter. Do we see anything that's missing up there? Facebook, right? Young people are not on Facebook. And this is one of our lessons learned as we jump into our case study. We did a lot of efforts in our first campaign on Facebook, and we didn't meet young people where they're at, because that's not where they are. That's not where they're getting their information. They're on Instagram, they're on TikTok, and they're interfacing with different platforms in different ways. But across the board, we are finding that youth and young adults are mostly on Instagram, and that's where they're looking to for information. So well done, all done with polls. Give yourselves a pat on the back and a thumbs up. And so I think this exercise is really helpful, because it really lays kind of the landscape before we jump into the efforts that we did to really paint the picture of just how much time young people are spending on social media. This is where they are getting their information. This is where they're interacting with peers. This is where they're seeing health messaging. And it really is that kind of saying of, you have to meet people where they're at, and young people are on social media. And so as we moved into sheltering in place and doing distance learning in COVID, we shifted our focus to digital resources versus print. And we knew not only that was where young people were at, but also that they were continuing to interface at increased rates with social media and health messaging there. So again, we saw this as a really critical time to develop this campaign. And now we'll jump through what that looked like and that timeline. So this is a timeline of the CYA and social media campaigns that we created. I'm going to have this as kind of a ledger in the bottom of each slide, so you can kind of track along where we're going. So beginning in April 2020, we consumer tested, promoted, and analyzed 2 full digital campaigns specifically for youth and young adult audiences. And then we had 1 smaller digital campaign that I call kind of the campaign 2B, which is there in the bottom right corner. So in April, we began developing and testing that first campaign, which ran on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook for a total of 7 weeks. And this was really in response to the quickly changing world that youth and young adults found themselves in as a result of COVID. And again, I'll get into the specific details of each campaign. This is just the overview. And then again, as we kind of move through this timeline, the landscape started to change in the fall. We had more information on how tobacco use patterns were changing and how young people were maybe not experimenting as much or accelerating their use. And so we shifted that focus and developed a digital treatment campaign. And that was consumer tested last October. And then that was promoted on Instagram in November and December, which you can see there is that red dot. And then again, that little 2B campaign in January was really just a companion campaign that we ran and promoted on Instagram to kind of support and encourage young people who may have made a New Year's resolution to quit vape and tobacco products. I do want to call out that we did not consumer test this small campaign. We weren't creating any new messages. Everything had already been tested in terms of the types of images and messages. So we weren't reinventing the wheel, so we didn't consumer test. And again, we'll dive into each campaign and the outcomes in the session. So as I kind of mentioned in the beginning, we always do a full formal communications plan before we start any social media campaign. Again, that is a much bigger process to go through than just one slide. It's a full training. But I do want to kind of just give a high level of what that looks like, because this is most often the question I get from coalitions, from young people, from students when they're wanting to start any social media campaign work. And so the first thing I always suggest is to start by having a clear goal. And I know that that sounds maybe a bit vague and obvious, but a good campaign has to have a clear goal. And that goal is really going to shape the entirety of the campaign's subsequent steps. That's your foundation. So start by asking yourself, what is this goal? What is it that we want to accomplish by creating and placing this social media? Do we want to prevent initiation? Do we want to encourage quit attempts among young people? Do we want to support quit attempts? Because each one of those aims is going to have a very different tone and likely a very different audience. And so when we think about audience, once we've selected that goal, again, this might seem obvious. Yes, we're talking about youth and young adults and likely students, but are we talking to young people who are experimenting? Are we talking to maybe first-year college students who are, just starting to live away from home and on campus? Are we talking to current tobacco users? So again, really the more you can have a clear vision of who you're crafting that message for, the better reach that campaign is going to have. And then I say assess the landscape. Let's say you wanted to, support student quit attempts. You want to start to ask young people around you and do some research, check social media, look online. What's the landscape of use patterns? Has tobacco culture use changed for that audience? Think about things like COVID-19. What's driving tobacco use? Is it stress? Is it boredom? And again, knowing that landscape is going to allow you to continue to hone in on that message. And again, the goal is delivering that message to the right young people at the right time. And then ask questions, right? Young people are really the experts here. You want to be mindful that you are talking with, not at. Even if it's just 1 or 2 young people or students that you have a good relationship or your coalition, it doesn't have to be formal consumer testing. but ask them, what are they seeing? What are they hearing? They're the eyes and the ears and the pulse on the ground. Are they seeing different things on TikToks? Are they seeing different products? Every time we start a campaign, we start to assess that by talking to our youth board, by talking to our college board of directors, and that really shapes the whole campaign for us. And then collaborate, ask them to share it with their friends. Ask them, once you put that message together, does this make sense? Does this sound correct? Would you pay attention to this? I've crafted so many messages that I think are so poignant and that are so important for young people. And we'll have, our college board or youth board look at it and they'll say, this sounds like an old person wrote it. And I'm like, well, good point. Let's recalibrate. How would you say this? So again, that piece is incredibly helpful. We need to be looping in the audience that we're talking to and making sure that those messages are correct. So again, just kind of a big picture of what that communications planning looks like as we go through the campaign. So jumping into our spring 2020 campaign, what's happening at this point? It's COVID, right? So, youth and young people are really adapting to immense change. We're all moving to virtual learning, we're sheltering in place, and we're hearing about the impacts of COVID relating to tobacco use. And so with that in mind, we worked with our youth board of directors and our COF student board of directors to start this social media campaign. And again, having that discussion with them. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you feeling? And really what came across was that the message at that time really mattered. In order for young people to interact with it, it had to be something that they actually wanted to see and hear. There was so much health messaging going on at that point about COVID, and they expressed that it was feeling really scary and overwhelming, and they were just getting all of this health messaging thrown at them, but none of it really addressed their concerns or what they were feeling in that moment, which was really, how do I cope with stress and anxiety without tobacco? How do I address these feelings of loneliness I have from sheltering in place without tobacco? And really, I have all this time, I'm home. How do I manage all this free time and boredom without tobacco use? And so again, what came across was this sense of urgency. What's going to help me cope in this moment? And so we took those three themes and that sense of an actionable tip to address them and selected stock images with the transposed text and consumer tested them. So this is a screenshot of what our Surveymonkey looked like. And it was really simple. So we asked our youth and young adult partners, our youth board and our college board, to share this link with friends. And we collected over 60 youth and young adult responses from across 11 counties throughout the state. For all you data lovers, I did make a note here that our median age of our youth reviewers was 15 on this campaign, so right in that target for us. And the median age of our young adult reviewer was 22. So again, pretty smack dab in where we wanted to be. And we just showed them each post and asked a series of really simple questions. What's your favorite? What's your least favorite? What do you like? What do you dislike? What would you change? Would you stop and look at this campaign? Where would you suggest placing it, right? So what social media platforms? Preferences for hashtags, and most importantly, really, what other messages do you think young people would relate to or want to hear right now? And I will say, while the feedback was overwhelmingly positive, there was some really critical feedback offered, and really we couldn't have gotten that without the consumer testing. And that feedback really did shape the whole campaign. We ended up, and we'll talk about this, going from 9 posts to 18. We changed images. And it was really humbling to see how much young people related to these images and how invested they were in offering feedback that would make them have the greatest reach. And so here is some very clear examples of the youth and young adult feedback shaping the campaign. That top row there of the 3 posts are the images we tested. So those are what the young people saw in the Surveymonkey. And then that bottom row there are actually the final versions once that youth and young adult feedback was incorporated. And you can see they look very different. So just starting there in that top corner, young people said they felt like this post was like super generic. They didn't really understand what quarantine meant. One person even said it sounded like an old millennial said it. And I was like, okay, I take that slightly personal. And they just said they wouldn't look at it. It didn't look like a real young person. It didn't really have a message. And so we changed it, right? We paired it with a beautiful image of a young woman. We got rid of quarantine, and it is such a different tone and feeling. And it is now a very powerful digital media post. That middle image is, I think, the most interesting that came out of the feedback. And this was actually pretty polarizing in terms of what we heard from young people. Several young youth and young adults said that they felt the message in the image felt kind of overly negative and a little bit cheesy. But a lot of young people did actually say they liked it. It felt real. And a handful of reviewers actually suggested having this be two different posts and just changing the tone. So that top one there, and we did run both of these, says vaping can increase, whereas the bottom says quitting vaping can lower. And so focusing on the positive outcome of quitting. And so the idea that the reviewers shared was, let's cast this net so that we don't lose anyone in messaging. Maybe for the folks who like, the sort of more serious tone, they'll relate to this, versus the young people who want to focus on the benefits of quitting. And again, you can see how just, incorporating that feedback really yielded a different bottom version there. And then that final image there on the right, again, young people felt like the image was generic. It just looked like, an older white woman. You can't see a face. They didn't really, understand the make ohms, not O's. That didn't translate well. So again, pairing it with a young person that looked like them, showing a face, making it feel more curated versus generic. And really just focusing on the message, right? This is that urgency, that actionable tip. Meditation can lower your stress, it can lower anxiety, and it can help you cope with those tobacco triggers. That's what they want to see. They don't need the catchy little make ohms, not O's. And then just some final takeaways there on the right. We actually did start out, and this makes me giggle now in hindsight, right, which is 2020. We actually did start out calling the campaign Try Something New. And I'm so glad we did consumer testing, because it turns out the word try is associated with experimentation of drugs for young people. And so one young person actually said, oh yeah, I really like the name of this campaign because I've been wanting to try those water vapes. And we were like, oh my gosh, we need to change this. And so it went from try something new to find something new. Also in terms of hashtags, we had it say quit tobacco, and a lot of young people said, my friends don't even necessarily think about vapes as being part of tobacco. So you need to say quit vaping, or else no one's going to pay attention to it. And so we made that change. And then again, finally, based on the feedback, we grew the initial campaign from 9 posts to 18 posts and had 2 images per message. And again, this was totally based on feedback from young people sharing that they wanted to see a diverse and inclusive campaign full of young people that looked like them, that felt like them, and that felt real. And so this is the final project here. I just wanted to kind of show you this snapshot and glimpse here. And again, this is the full 18 posts, and you can see that it's full of color and real faces and diversity and just simple, direct messaging. And all of our posts, you probably saw, had some language there. All of our posts directed young people to our cessation website, which was released in conjunction with this campaign last spring. And this became a really critical piece of learning for us, which is that all posts absolutely have to have a call to action or resource included. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in our lessons learned. But again, it's that idea of young people don't just want health messaging kind of thrown at them. They want it to link to something they can do, right? Whether that's a text app, whether that's a cessation page, whether that's, your coalition's website, whether that's a hotline, whatever that might be, it needs to connect to a resource for them. And then just as a side note, this website is available in both English and Spanish. And it does have tons of information and quit sources specifically for youth and young adult audiences. And there's downloadable materials that you can access on there as well. And again, we'll talk about our resources at the end. So then in terms of how we placed and targeted this media, you can see our placement calendar there on the left. Posts were placed on varying days and hours. This first campaign we did post on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. The campaign ran for a total of 7 weeks, with each post running for roughly 5 to 6 days. We did pay for post targeting, and that was targeted specifically at youth and young adults aged 13 to 25 who are living in California. Our media budget wasn't massive for this. So even if you're able to, post and promote even for $5 or $6 just to get those analytics, it's very, very valuable. Really, we did all of our design and testing in-house. So our only true real cost was that promotion piece and boosting those posts. And it was very helpful to help us recalibrate for future, that second future campaign. So as I said, all of these sites do provide analytics, so you can see the reach on your campaign. So this is how we did. And it's helpful to not just see how we did, but also how we can increase that reach for future campaigns. So you can see there on the bottom, I've highlighted Instagram. It was overwhelmingly more successful than the other two, Twitter and Facebook, across really all 3 metrics. So impressions, which is how many young people see the post, likes, so these are folks who've actually liked it or hearted, and probably most importantly, that click through to the CYAN cessation website. So again, that was that resource we linked to. And what I think is so interesting and worthy of calling out here was there was kind of this really interesting phenomena that happened. And again, this is why that kind of data piece is so helpful, which is that we saw a huge amount of likes on the front end of the campaign, but not so many not so many click-throughs to the quit resource in the beginning. But as the campaign went on, we saw our likes decrease and we actually saw our click-throughs increase. And so there definitely is something to be said about running a multi-week campaign and this sort of theory of change. And what I kind of theorized was that young people were maybe seeing one of the posts and bookmarking it. And then as they kind of moved from sort of thinking about quitting to maybe actively trying, they went back and accessed that resource. And so again, always tying that social media post to a resource is so important. And again, it was likes and clicks, and then it switched at the end to, likes dropping and click-throughs to that website increasing. So making sure that you're promoting and running these over, at least a week or so is really important, because I do think that it's maybe often not that first interface with the post. Maybe it's bookmarking it, maybe it's saving it in your phone, maybe it's sending it to a friend, and young people are circling back to it. And then these are just some key takeaways specifically from this campaign. And again, we'll dive more deeply into our lessons learned at the end. But we took all of this information from our kind of campaign and incorporated it into our second campaign, which we'll talk about. But what we heard from our consumer testing was that young people really wanted to see bright, vivid color. They wanted something that would get their attention. Again, think about it. We're competing with young people who are on a screen while watching TV, so it's got to draw them in. And they like seeing faces. So again, thinking about how we incorporated that feedback before and after of just, seeing a hand holding a phone versus a young woman and seeing her. And particularly what came across was that young people actually like to see smiling faces. When we would ask young people in the consumer testing to, tell us which was their favorite image and why, they would say, oh, I really liked this one because, she looked so happy, or he had a big smile and that got my attention. So smiling faces was also something that they like to see. And then just to kind of piggyback that as well, that sense of wanting to see diverse and inclusive imagery. They want young people to look like them. They want young people to reflect their their communities. And this is, I will say, using stock image, there's a lot of improvement there that needs to happen. So really being mindful, if it, sometimes it would take me an hour to find the right image going through it to find that. So I think, again, making sure that we're selecting images with our messages and graphics that look like the young people we're talking to is so important. And it might take a little bit more legwork on our end, but it's worth it, and do it. And then finally, what came across was this strong preference for positive health messaging. And I think that kind of speaks to wanting to see smiles. And at this juncture, especially with all of that unknown and scary messaging about COVID, this was a time where young people really wanted something that was positive, that focused on the positive outcomes, that had a smile, that had bright colors. And we also knew that they wanted to see that paired with an actionable tip. So don't just tell me I need to quit. I know I need to quit. Don't just tell me quitting will do X, Y, and Z. Tell me how to do it. Help me. Give me a tip. Give me a resource. One thing to always think about when we're talking specifically to youth, not so much young adults, is that those resources need to say that they're free and anonymous. The fear of a parent finding out, having to put your email, possibly getting a text is huge. And so on all of our youth specific materials, we will say in bold, for free and anonymous support or free and anonymous resources. This is something that was very key in our consumer testing. And then finally, like what we saw with the marketing data, young people like Instagram. We, again, in hindsight, without that data, probably would have continued to promote on Facebook had we not seen how different the data was and how much greater the reach was on Instagram. And so we used all of that information with our first campaign to craft the next round of messaging for our social media campaign in October, which looked very different in terms of how young people were using tobacco. We had more information and some data coming out by the fall about kind of that changing pattern of youth and young adult tobacco use as a result of COVID. And what we saw, and we kind of talked about this in the first webinar, was that we were seeing fewer young people who were maybe experimenting, transition into that long-term use, which was good news. But unfortunately, young people who maybe were frequent users or regular users of vape and tobacco products prior to the pandemic, transitioning into a more accelerated addiction and escalated product use. And so it became really clear to us that this is a super critical time for quit attempts for young people, and that what was really needed was strong cessation messaging and a digital treatment campaign. And so again, we worked with our COF board of directors and our youth board to craft the messages for this second campaign. And again, you can see in the bottom there, our little box is moving along. We're now on the yellow circle. And so we wanted to really know the types of cessation messages that mattered most to young people at that time. So again, thinking about that sense of urgency that was expressed when we crafted the first campaign. And also, most importantly, their motivators to quit, which probably look familiar from our first webinar. And the top three motivators expressed by youth and young adults were the fear of health impacts, so current and future, and also that link to COVID. The expense, right? Just the actual dollar expense of the products. And then finally, that fear of addiction piece, and not being addicted to be part of their identity, and not wanting to feel like they didn't have power and control, or that they were controlled by an addiction. And so I think probably most importantly as well, what was stressed was that they wanted real, actual tips, real things they could do to help them manage their triggers and cravings. Because what we also heard from young people and what we know from the research is that there is a strong fear of withdrawal symptoms. And so we really started to think about not just the messaging, but how can we pair this messaging with a resource that will take into account access and proximity to things, right? So we wanted to put together a digital quit kit specifically for young people at this time that the messages would pair with that allowed them to use things around the house. So things like toothpicks or, making flavored waters, really things that were accessible with little to no cost around them. And that would be the resource we would pair this campaign with. And so like our first campaign, again, this probably looks familiar, the Surveymonkey. Surveymonkey is your friend if you want to do consumer testing. So we developed this campaign in two parts. So it was two prongs. So we wanted to front end it by addressing those top 3 quit motivators for young people. So that health, the expense, and the fear of addiction. And then the subsequent 12 posts were created to offer those quit tips and the resources and actionable tools to manage triggers and cravings. And so just like the first round, we did the consumer testing with very similar questions. We asked folks, which post do you like the most? Which do you like the least? Would this campaign get your attention? And again, are there any additional messages that are needed? This campaign was reviewed by over 100 youth and young adults across 15 counties throughout the state. So a pretty solid net there. The median age of young people is 16, and the median age for our young adult audience reviewers was 20. And then like the previous campaign, this is kind of the before and afters. So the top line there is what the young people reviewed. The bottom line is our final product. Just starting from the left there, I think this was a really great call out. So being mindful of kind of our tobacco speak, I think is important. One young person said, as soon as I see your risk of anything, it instantly seems boring and serious and I'm not going to read it, right? So just simply changing that from your risk of to quitting vaping lowers and focusing on that positive outcome of quitting. Again, changes the whole tone, same image, same message, but just slightly tweaked, and it's a very different experience. That middle image there, again, I think this is that tobacco speak, right? Build a quit team. Young people didn't know what a quit team was. That's something that we use as adults or as, people who are working in the field. But that doesn't necessarily translate with young people. And so again, just removing that and saying, build a team, create a quit team of friends. That's what this is, who are going to help you manage those triggers. And again, same image, same message, just in a more accessible package. That third image there, again, really shows the power of imagery. Several young people said that young woman just looked really sad and unhappy, and like the vibe didn't really match the message. And again, they wanted to see a smiling face. So we're talking about, imagine your life vape free. The tone needs to match that. So just, again, changing the image, completely different experience for young people who would see this. And then finally there on the end, young people felt that the top post was too wordy. They weren't going to interact with it. They weren't going to read it. Just scrolling, it was too much to read. So we actually ended up creating this into 4 separate posts with each one of those sort of activities that you could do. And I think an important call out here as well is that a young person also said, I don't know what trigger or craving means. So again, that idea of we're using language that we understand if we're working in tobacco control, but we can't assume that youth and young adults are using that language or understand what that means. So changing it to, instead of, trigger or craving, the urge to vape. So again, being mindful of the words that we are using is so important. So here is the full campaign. Again, you can kind of see the 2-prong approach here where we front-ended it with the quit motivators to really encourage the quit attempts. And then that second wave of posts was really served as a support for the subsequent quit attempts. And I do want to mention as well that this campaign was also reviewed by the California Smokers Helpline, local cessation experts, and also physicians prior to launch. And so we really felt like this was a powerful tool, and we wanted to make sure that we got the messages right. So we rallied all the troops on this one for the feedback. As I mentioned, all of the posts were linked to our CYAN website and released in conjunction with this. So that call to action was our digital quit kit, which again is specifically for young people. It has tips and tools and free resources, again, that are either around the house or low or no cost. It has things like journaling prompts related to your quit journey. And again, this is available to download on our website for you. So then in terms of how we placed and targeted this media, again, you can see our social media calendar there. We just placed these posts on Instagram. So we did not do any promotion or paid post on Twitter or Facebook like the last campaign. It wasn't a good return on our investment. It wasn't reaching our intended audience. So we focused all of our efforts on Instagram. Like the previous campaign, this campaign ran for a total of 7 weeks. Again, we did pay to post and target with the same bucket of young people, so 13 to 25 living in California. And again, this was, as we kind of talked about, released in those 2 waves. So that front end was addressing the quit motivators to encourage quits. And then the second wave was hopefully as those young people moved through that kind of pre-contemplation into an active quit, they now were provided with quit support and tips on how to manage those urges or those triggers and cravings. And then here's how we did. So that top line there is our spring 2020 campaign. And that bottom line there is our fall 2020 campaign. Same budget, same targeting, but astronomically higher numbers of click-through to the cessation website. We saw over 1,600 click-throughs, which is almost 110% increase from the previous social media campaign. So it really tells us that this was the right message at the right time, reaching the right young people. So, I think, again, like our previous campaign, we did see that increase in engagement towards the end of the campaign. So again, that theory of change. We had more click-throughs and more bookmarking. Instagram does give you that analytic at the end. So again, this idea that they, maybe saw that quit motivator, then maybe saw the tip and moved into that sort of active quit. And then this is that to be campaign that we talked about, which was not consumer tested because we weren't reinventing the messaging wheel. It was just a very simple, very direct campaign, again, to really leverage that excitement around making a New Year's resolution and likely that young people were making a resolution to quit vaping. And it was just, now is a great time to quit. And it linked young people to our cessation website. And this is promoted through the month of January, again, just on Instagram with the same targeting of 13 to 25 in California. All right, thank you for going through our social media journey with me. Now we're going to talk about really what we learned and what we can apply to future campaigns, and hopefully things that will be helpful for you and the work that you do in terms of crafting messages or any campaigns that you may create. So I think this is probably the best example of our lessons learned. So on the left there is one of our lowest liked and least amount of click-throughs to our quit site. And when I think about what we heard from young people, this is generic. This looks like stock imagery. You don't see a young person that looks like them. You don't see a smiling face. And I'd probably keep scrolling too, right? When we look at the image on the right, which was one of our highest click-throughs in January, all of that feedback from young people we incorporated. It's a young person that is, it feels diverse, it feels inclusive, it's a smiling face, she's holding technology. If we're, leading them to a resource or an app that they can click on, we should probably show someone holding a phone. So just looking at these two, they feel different. You can see that feedback incorporated. And again, this is directly from young people. And then some of our other lessons learned in terms of health messaging with young people on social media. I do want to say this is not the gold standard. This is what we found and what we've heard from young people through our consumer testing and through focus groups. Because we do know that social media trends and preferences change quickly. But again, this is what we've learned. We know that young people want health messaging to be simple, direct, and easy to digest. So thinking again about that public health speak or that tobacco speak of, the young person saying, I don't know what a trigger or craving is. Does that mean when I feel the urge to vape? So being mindful of the language that we're using is very critical with youth and young adults in messaging health messages. Think about scare tactics or being overly negative. Young people, especially now, again, I feel it too. There's so much health messaging, even as an adult, it can be overwhelming. It can be scary, focusing perhaps on the positive outcomes of quitting versus why vaping is bad for them. Most young people are starting to get a sense and understanding that it is. What they want is to know why they should quit and how to do it. So again, the smiling face, the positive spin on the great things that will happen if they imagine their life vape free is going to increase the likelihood of interaction with a young person. And then again, those positive and helpful messages. They want to look at it and feel good. They don't want to feel doom and gloom. And again, I think these two images really kind of capture that. We're talking about vaping, but when you saw this image, you wouldn't think it was, it wouldn't be a quit vaping post, right? You want to interact with it. They're young people who are happy, and it draws you into the message. And I think something really critical to call out as well is, and I find myself doing this as well as I craft messages, is that we really do have to ask ourselves, what information do young people need to know about vaping versus what information will they actually pay attention to? And those are two very different things. There's lots of information we want them to know. There are lots of things we wish we could express, but we have to actually think about what they're going to pay attention to. And then just as kind of like a sidebar best practice, you want to keep that information at or under typically an 8th grade reading level. So running those comprehension tests is also really important. We run all of our messages through that. And again, we aim for that 6th to 8th grade level. Youth and young adults also want actionable tips, not just facts, right? So don't just tell me vaping is bad for me. Tell me what I can do to quit. Tell me how to. Tell me what the resources are. Tell me I should chew gum to help with a trigger or to drink water. Having an action makes it feel like I can do this. It's not just health messaging talking at me. Again, we've talked a lot about this, and I can't stress this enough. You've got to tie the social media to a resource. Don't just tell me vaping is bad for me. Give me a quit page. Give me more information. And what I will say about that as well is always put link to bio or put, whatever it is that you're having them click to with your social media in your profile, because you will lose so many young people if they have to copy and paste a link. I lose myself too. I'm like, oh, if I can't click on that, whatever, and I move on. So make it accessible and make it something easy for them to actually follow through and take that action on, because we know the more difficult it is to access the resource, the likelihood of them doing it is also less. And then again, always clearly stating that it is free and it is anonymous right at the front end. We put that on all of our social media. We put that on all of our print materials. With youth particularly, that's key. We also know that young people want bright and vivid colors, right? We're competing with lots of screens, so we want to get something that's going to draw them in. We know that they like happy faces and they like real faces. So this is something really interesting as well, which is consumer testing with young people overwhelmingly told us that they want to see real smiling faces, not vectors and not illustrations. Overall, they preferred to see a real young person, and a real young person that looked like them, that had to feel diverse, it had to feel inclusive, and it really had to represent the communities they were living within and the diversity of our states. And then finally, just in terms of youth and young adult preference with how they interact with social media, overall, they preferred Instagram over Twitter and Facebook. And that also shows us in our results, right? We didn't have a good ROI for Twitter and Facebook, and we also didn't have good click-through links. So young people were more likely to interface with our social media and also engage with it by clicking to that click-through on Instagram. That's not to say that things like YouTube or Snapchat or TikTok are not good options. We tend to do still images. We don't do a lot of video content, but if that was the kind of campaign you were doing, Instagram might not be the best place for that. It might be something like TikTok, because we also know young people are there. Young people like hashtags, so get cozied up with your hashtags and don't be afraid to use them. We also know that young people, and this is from consumer testing, want to see the first letter of each word in a hashtag capitalized. So there's an example there. Young people said that they like emojis and they like interactive posts, so being able to scroll through multiple images, more than just something stagnant, right? So if you're able to break up a post into multiple things, so they're scrolling through it, that they liked that. And then also finally, that piece about putting a link in bio. Young people are not going to copy and paste it. So if you're directing them to a resource, on Instagram, go up, put it right in your description so that the young person can click on it. They won't copy and paste. And then just quickly, we've kind of woven these throughout our presentation here, but I do want to call out the resources that we have available to you, and all of the digital and social media materials that you are able to download directly on our website. So all of these posts from all three of the campaigns, or 2.5 with that 2B, are free for download and available on our website. And these can also be customized. So if you don't maybe want to have something directing young people to our website, we could maybe put, your health office or your student health services or your coalition, or, a general landing page or a different resource. We can customize those for you. And again, you can download these. These are broken up in buckets too. So we've got the quit tips, the reasons for quitting, and also the now is a great time to quit. And then this is, again, our Quit Tobacco page, which is available in English and Spanish. This is where you can also access the digital quit kit, which is also available for download in English and Spanish. And then for those of you who saw the partners post, this week we are releasing our translated Spanish versions of our posts. We worked with the Latino Coordinating Center to translate these and update the imagery. And these will be released and promoted on Instagram as part of Latinx Heritage Month. So starting on the 15th of September through October 15th. And these will be made available for download as well. So we're really excited to be working with the Latino Coordinating Center to release these, and hopefully we'll be sharing the Instagram analytics and reach and lessons learned with that campaign with you as well. As always, it's super helpful if after this training, you could please complete our evaluation. Dean Paul is going to pop that into the chat for folks. I promise it's not very painful. I think it's 5 questions, and it just really helps us get a sense of how we did and also what other trainings you would like to see. And then there is my contact information. We've got about 3 minutes here for questions or comments or resource sharing. But if we're not able to get to them, by all means, jot down my email address and I'd be happy to follow up with you directly. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. If anyone has any questions or thoughts, you are welcome to unmute yourself and jump in. We've got a couple minutes. Jessica, yes, the slides will be shared as well as the recording. So we'll share both the recording and the slides with you in the next few days. You are very welcome, everyone. All right, well, if we don't have any questions, Shane, great question. We have not tried, in terms of a targeted campaign on social media, we have not done any targeted paid video content. It's something that we've talked about and maybe something we would explore in the future. We've just worked on images with click-throughs to the cessation link, but I think especially now with the popularity of TikTok, and a lot of young people are also now spending a lot of time on YouTube, it would be something to explore. We just haven't done it yet. How would you recommend using photo voice on social media? I would say actually you can do longer videos or larger video posts on Instagram that links out to ITV. That's something that you could put on there. You could also, kind of do like a teaser of, to see the rest of this video or to hear the rest of this story, click here, or, to learn how tobacco is targeting or impacting your community, whatever that photo voice is about. But young people do like to watch videos. They do like to interact with that video content. So photo voice might be a really good pairing for that if you are making a video with a voiceover, and use things like sound on and emojis or learn more to really make that interactive. Great question. Okay, Heather, how long does it typically take to create all the graphics and finalize them before putting them out? Just wondering about the background work and timelines. Great question. So we do work with a graphic designer for the first campaign. The second campaign, I actually just updated and changed colors and picked images. I will say it can be time consuming. We used iStock, but there are free stock image sites. Stock image is starting to get a little bit more diverse and inclusive. But at the time, it took, I would say, a fair amount of time to find those images. I would, beginning to end, from crafting messages to consumer testing to integrating all the feedback, I would say 3 to 5 weeks. The first campaign probably took close to that 5-week mark because we were building the infrastructure, but with the second campaign, we were able to, clone that Surveymonkey and update the questions. We already had kind of a format. We were just working on the messages for the second campaign. But again, it doesn't have to be 18 or 24 messages. It could be 3 or 4. It could take a few days. It just depends on the size and the reach that you're hoping for. It may, and sometimes that formal consumer testing can take a long time. But if you even, like I said, that consumer testing could be super informal. It could be 2 or 3 students. So it could be much smaller and it could take as little as a few days. I don't want to scare anyone away by saying 5 weeks. That is the extreme end. All right, well, if there are not any more questions, I think we will wrap up. Again, I'll be sending a thank you email with the link to the recording and the slides in the next few days. I hope this was helpful. I hope you all feel motivated to start creating your own social media content. And again, please do remember to fill out that evaluation. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your Tuesday.